FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
The problem with the Bernanke and Paulson formulation, however, is it's not just a crisis of capital or liquidity or solvency. It's a crisis of trust. People don't really trust the numbers written down on pieces of paper or in digits that are supposed to represent assets. They don't trust those. In fact, it's not just ordinary people, it's investment banks, and it's banks lending to other banks. In fact, the whole system last week and the week before was in danger of imploding because trust had almost evaporated. And the question is, where is trust going to come from? If we need trust, how to rebuild trust? And is trust going to be rebuilt if and when Wall Street gets $700 billion more assets? Good question. Right before Congress right now is the question, what kind of conditions ought to be placed on this? I mean, if you're a member of Congress, you are, and you're told by the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chair of the Fed that if you do not do as they say, there's going to be a financial implosion. Bigger than any financial implosion you've ever seen, a meltdown of perhaps the world financial markets, maybe the world economy. You, as a member of Congress, facing a re-election, most of you in less than 6 weeks, eager to get home to campaign, knowing that there is really not much of a leader of the nation because there's a lame duck president whose approval ratings are lower than almost any lame duck president's approval ratings in recent history, worried that if you say yes, your constituents are going to think that you have sold out to the establishment, to Wall Street bankers who have been earning zillions of dollars over the past 10, 15 years, and whose malfeasance and nonfeasance and cupidity and stupidity have got us into this mess. Many of your constituents are going to be furious. They already are furious if you vote for it. But if you don't vote for it, and in fact there is a financial meltdown, and if that meltdown occurs before Election Day, and people lose their homes and their jobs and their savings, there's going to be hell to pay on the other side. You're in an impossible position. And so what do? The clock is ticking. You're told you have to make a decision possibly by Friday, because if you don't make a decision by Friday, by Sunday, the Tokyo stock market is going to open, and if no decision is made, maybe worldwide stocks are going to plunge. Maybe that's the beginning of the end. Tick, tick, tick. Well, you're probably going to desperately ask every one of your colleagues, and you're going to reach across the aisle. You want some protection. You don't want, if you're a Democrat, you don't want to make a decision unless you have Republicans behind you. You don't want to be side-swiped in that kind of classic political way. You're going to say to the administration, well, we'll go along, maybe, but we're going to put some conditions on this. But also, we will go along only if we get a majority of Republicans to go along, too. This has got to be strictly bipartisan. And by the way, what kind of conditions are we going to say? Well, number one, there's got to be some limit on the salaries of these Wall Street executives if they're going to be bailed out by taxpayers who are scrimping and saving and worried about how to pay their bills. There's got to be some penalty. And number two, there's going to be some regulation. I mean, if we got in this trouble because there was inadequate transparency, inadequate disclosure, inadequate capital requirements, inadequate guards against all sorts of things, not the least of which is conflicts of interest, and maybe even market manipulation. We've got to have regulations against all of this. This somehow has got to be tied up with regulations. And thirdly, we would assume, most people in this country would assume, that if we're going to bail out Wall Street, there ought to be something for homeowners who are in danger of losing their homes, maybe a process of reorganization, maybe open a sort of bankruptcy process to them so that they can easily reorganize those loans, get better terms, if it's possible, fixed 30-year terms? Wall Street, you've got to be open to this. If you want this kind of bailout, most of the public is saying. And finally, the public is saying, and many of the members of Congress on both sides are hearing the public say this loud and clear, if the taxpayers are going to take on this huge risk, then the taxpayers need some sort of equity in these companies, some sort of share in these companies. So when and if profitability returns, the taxpayers can share in that profitability. Otherwise, we have capitalism on the upside and socialism on the downside. And that seems to be where Congress is going. But always look for the fine print.